Hey guys, tonight we step into late November 1950, trudging through early whispers of a Midwest blizzard, with a reality check: you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and amp, local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step out into the chill that nips at your cheeks like an impatient sibling. The wind carries the scent of frozen soil, damp wood, and something slightly metallic, maybe the looming promise of ice. The horizon is muted gray, a flat expanse that seems to stretch forever, and the first whispers of snow flake through the air. You tug your coat tighter, feeling the stiffness of wool against your arms. It's deceptive, though. The snow looks soft, almost gentle, but there's a hush over the landscape that hints at how relentless the storm will be. You might laugh at the irony of walking through a silent blizzard, but that laughter gets swallowed up by the wind. In towns across the Midwest, people are moving differently today. Their steps are measured, cautious. Windows are shuttered, curtains pulled tight against the coming freeze. Families gather firewood in heaps that will barely scratch the surface of the blizzard's appetite. You can almost see the flash of worry in someone's eyes as they measure the length of their supply shelves, calculating if 1 can of beans per person will last longer than a single night of this cold. Oddly, some are hiding marshmallows in cabinets, reasoning that a gooey treat might keep spirits afloat. Historians still argue whether these small acts of whimsy were meaningful morale boosters or just quirky anecdotes that survived through gossip. You notice the roads are emptying fast. Fewer kids skate along icy sidewalks, even the dogs are hesitant, their paws crunching over the first frosty layer with careful consideration. A neighbor waves, bundled in 3 scarves, and you realize he is probably the only one who truly enjoys this creeping frost. His cheerful absurdity is a reminder that humans, even in extremity, are inventive with their rituals and superstitions. And speaking of invention, some people had turned to homemade thermometers, tiny vials of mercury balanced against paper scales, trying to predict the storm's trajectory with a seriousness that borders on devotion. Historians still argue whether these home devices ever provided useful insight or simply made people feel more in control as the blizzard approached. You trudge past the frozen cornfields that ripple like metallic waves under the early snow. There's a smell of wet husks and soil, a tang of frostbite in the air that makes your nostrils flare involuntarily. Somewhere behind a farmhouse, a stove crackles and hisses, a promise of warmth that seems both distant and tantalizing. You catch yourself wondering if this is one of those moments that gets remembered, a day where everything pauses, where time drags just enough for small acts, like shoveling a path or securing a window, to feel monumental. This is history happening at the pace of snowflakes. Remember that feeling of stepping outside in November when you thought the cold was sharp, but manageable? Multiply it by every neighbor, every family, every farm animal that will soon feel the storm's tightening grip. It's quiet now, deceptively quiet. You probably won't survive this without feeling the creeping sense of vulnerability, the way the cold seeps into bones and thoughts alike. But that's the point. You are not just observing, you are imagining, slipping into the shoes of those who faced the first whispers of the Thanksgiving blizzard of 1950. By the time the first flakes stick to your eyelashes, your mind starts linking patterns: the hush of the wind, the hush of the town, the hush before history writes itself in white. And just like that, you are inside the story, trudging alongside farmers, teachers, children, and dogs who all have their own peculiar ways of noticing the shift in the season. Some might argue that the storm's earliest signs were visible on the horizon of weather reports, while others swear by the behaviors of cows, the bend of tree branches, or even the flight patterns of birds as the true predictors. You inhale, and the air tastes like iron and ice, your ears ring faintly against the emptiness of the streets. A single leaf, trapped in the snow's first layer, twirls like a tiny dancer and lands perfectly upright. You watch it and think, small, delicate, completely defiant against the coming storm. That's what tonight will be about, humans and nature, stubborn, fleeting, and strangely beautiful. And in this moment, you are not merely hearing the story, you are living it, stepping into its hush, letting the cold set the stage for the adventure to come. The forecasts were already as cryptic as an old treasure map. You lean against a lamppost, shivering, as the local radio crackles with a mixture of certainty and hesitation, meteorologists speaking in a language you almost understand, warning of temperatures dropping faster than a penny down a well. You probably wouldn't survive relying solely on these updates, and that's before you consider the folklore creeping in alongside them. Across towns, people are consulting cow behavior, listening to the lowing of livestock as if they were some furry barometer of doom. Some swear that when cows huddle closer to the barn, a big storm is imminent. Others insist that chickens acting confused is the true harbinger of blizzardy mischief. Historians still argue whether superstition ever outweighed the emerging science of weather forecasting in mid-20th century rural America. You follow the rhythm of hurried footsteps on snow-dusting streets. Some are stopping to glance at the sky, scanning for clouds that look suspiciously angry, while others are quietly muttering about cold fingers and frostbitten toes. It's funny in a bleak way, you're both impressed and slightly amused at how seriously these local rituals are taken. The dairy farmer who checks milk viscosity against wind direction seems almost like a scientist conducting experiments, but you know he's relying on decades of intuition passed down from his great-grandfather. And in a few towns, there are tales of teenagers climbing barns to wave tin pans at the sky, certain that making a racket will confuse the storm into thinking the town is already chaotic. Inside the homes, kitchens are alive with the smell of baking bread and roasted coffee beans, but the windows reveal frost spreading like lace. Families argue over whether the barometer is a reliable friend or a fickle enemy. You imagine yourself standing over a table of people debating whether to trust the weatherman or Grandma Snow-Eye, a custom where she peers out the window to gauge how fast the snow will arrive. Fringe tidbits circulate too. Some claim that maple syrup boiling over in early November signals the storm's intensity. You can't help but smile at the absurdity, though some swear it works. Meanwhile, telegraphs and newspapers try to keep pace, but the printed warnings arrive after the wind has already started playing its mischievous games. Streetlights flicker in anticipation of ice, and you note the way the pale glow casts everything in ghostly monochrome. Historians still argue whether these early warnings were genuinely effective or more like a psychological comfort, keeping townsfolk occupied while the storm brewed just out of view. You find yourself pondering the balance of science and superstition, how humans cling to both rational and whimsical predictions when the world seems uncertain. Outside, you notice signs on fences, beware, dogs may bite and help the cows. And wonder if anyone has actually read them in this weather, or if they're just formalities in the face of something much larger than a human sign could control. Every twitch of a branch or whistle of the wind carries meaning, real or imagined. One neighbor swears he saw the clouds swallow the sun like it was chewing gum, and while you may not believe him, you admire the imagery. Quirky, almost poetic, it mirrors the tension between the practical and the fantastical, between weather reports and whispered folklore. And you trudge forward through it all, noticing the hush creeping over the town. The snow hasn't started in earnest yet, but you already feel the suspense in your chest. Each footstep makes a soft crunch that echoes like a countdown. Each glance at the sky adds another chapter to the story you're stepping through. Some townsfolk are improvising thermometers, barometers, and wind indicators, creating a patchwork of instruments that may or may not help them survive. Historians still debate whether these tools were merely comforting or truly informative, but standing there, you can feel the anxiety in the air, tangible and brittle, like the first crack of ice forming on a pond. By the time the first flake drifts past your shoulder, there is a sense of anticipation that is both sweet and sinister. You realize the storm is teasing, testing you, the town, and every superstition and forecast that has been prepared. It's an odd, quiet kind of tension, and as you watch the sky grow heavier, you wonder how small rituals, like checking a cow's stance or boiling maple syrup, intersect with human survival instincts. And in this moment, you are not just a spectator, you are absorbing the careful choreography of folklore, science, and human imagination that precedes the chaos, letting it wrap around you as tightly as your coat. You trudge into kitchens and pantries where the smell of wood smoke mixes with the sharp tang of canned beans and powdered milk, imagining families scurrying to gather supplies for what might become a multi-day siege. The air inside feels warmer, but tension hums like static behind every conversation. Mothers and fathers shuffle groceries, stacking cans in precarious pyramids, while children peer curiously over countertops, trying to gauge if they'll have enough sugar for cookies, or, more importantly, enough marshmallows to satisfy their own secret morale plan. Yes, marshmallows. Some households stockpiled them not for sustenance but for sheer joy, reasoning that the simple sweetness might soften the icy edges of a relentless blizzard. Historians still argue whether these small acts of whimsy had any real psychological effect, or if they're just charming anecdotes that survived through oral histories. You imagine the clatter of jars, the crinkle of wrapping paper around firewood, the faint hum of a kerosene heater. Outside, the wind's first whispers scrape along rooftops, and even from inside, you feel the chill creeping past closed doors and drafty windows. In basements, people stack coal, imagining it as gold, counting each lump, strategizing for long nights when the heat might falter. It's a strange mix of practicality and ritual. The same hand that measures flour now checks the coal pile, as if both could make the difference between survival and misery. On the quirky side, some inventive townsfolk began creating emergency morale kits, often containing sugar cubes, a deck of cards, and small toys for children. You can almost see the kids' eyes lighting up as they trade stickers for chocolate, completely oblivious to the building storm outside. And yes, a few pranksters included tiny plastic turkeys in the mix, laughing at the idea of Thanksgiving being protected in miniature. Fringe historians speculate that these kits were more widespread than official records suggest, though mainstream sources barely mention them. You slip through the streets again, noting how people cross paths with more caution than usual. Every trip to a neighbor's house is a mini expedition. Someone balancing a sack of potatoes slips on a thin layer of frost and laughs nervously. You feel the camaraderie in these small, chaotic movements, a shared understanding that, yes, the snow will come, and everyone will need something, food, fuel, or just human warmth. Meanwhile, back in the pantries, sugar bowls are carefully rationed, and cans of meat are labeled with the date and a little hopeful note, "Eat me after the storm passes, unless you're really hungry." Animals are already influencing these human decisions. You notice cats hissing at windows or dogs pawing at doors to be let in. Even the most mundane actions, filling a bucket with water, carrying firewood, require careful planning around the unpredictable behaviors of pets, livestock, and, surprisingly, neighborhood chickens. Some chickens supposedly froze in mid-step during the first flurries, a story that circulated so widely it became a quasi-official anecdote. Historians still debate how much these animal behaviors truly guided human preparations, but there's no denying that families were watching and reacting. You pause in one house where a family is measuring the snow accumulation on the porch for fun, even as the wind picks up. The father mutters something about needing more lanterns, the mother frowns over a dwindling coal supply, and the children argue over whose turn it is to taste the marshmallows. The scene is chaotic, yet strangely comforting. The storm hasn't arrived in full force, but the preparation itself feels like a small triumph. You can almost hear history breathing in the creaks of floorboards, the shuffles of boots, the clink of tins, each sound a reminder that human ingenuity and whimsy coexist even in the approach of calamity. By the end of your imaginary walk through these kitchens and pantries, you're carrying both the weight of anticipation and a sense of wonder. Food, fire, and small luxuries like marshmallows are more than just survival, they are the emotional scaffolding that will hold people upright when the blizzard really hits. And as the first true gusts rattle the eaves outside, you understand that this gathering of goods isn't just preparation, it's a prelude, a quiet act of defiance against a storm that will challenge everyone who dares to meet it. The first flakes arrive almost imperceptibly, drifting down in lazy spirals that seem too innocent to warn of the fury they'll bring. You tilt your head, watching them land on your eyelashes and melt instantly, leaving a cold, wet sting. The snow seems gentle at first, a delicate quiet against the distant rumble of wind. But you already feel the deceptive calm, the kind that lulls you into thinking you're merely witnessing a pretty scene, rather than stepping into the prelude of chaos. Historians still debate whether early snowfall patterns in 1950 accurately predicted wind intensity or if the instruments of the time simply weren't capable of capturing the storm's true power. You crunch over the sidewalk, each step breaking the fragile crust of frost. There's a tactile satisfaction in the sound, almost musical, until you realize that the snow is thickening faster than anticipated. Your coat gathers tiny specks of icy crystals, and the air has that sharp, metallic tang that makes your nostrils flare. Across the street, a neighbor leans out to gauge the snow's weight on their porch, muttering about clouds that look like frozen oatmeal. You smile at the odd comparison. Only in Midwestern storms do poetic metaphors mingle so freely with practical observation. Inside the homes, the family routines become frenetic in a gentle, almost humorous way. Someone keeps forgetting to check the coal stove, another panics over the dwindling supply of canned vegetables, and a child insists on collecting snowflakes on the windowsill for science. You watch it all and think about how humans respond to the first signs of nature's escalating temperament. Fringe stories circulated that some kids tried to measure snowflakes with rulers, believing size could indicate storm strength, a practice both charming and scientifically useless, yet it spread like wildfire across small towns. Outside, drifts start forming along fences and garden beds, subtle at first, then increasingly conspicuous. You notice a lone mailbox bending under the weight of accumulated snow, its red flag standing stark against the white. Vehicles parked along streets begin disappearing beneath soft mounds, and the wind carries faint, eerie whistling tones as it threads through bare branches. Historians still argue whether the initial drifts in 1950 were truly unprecedented or if memory has exaggerated their suddenness. Whatever the case, there's no denying the sensation of being enveloped by something larger than yourself, a quiet assertion that nature is now actively participating in this story. Animals react in ways that hint at the storm's growing intensity. Dogs pause mid-step, lifting paws cautiously, and chickens cluster closer to the coop, feathers fluffed against the cold. Livestock in pastures turn their backs to the wind, seeking shelter in ways that human observers have long studied for signs of impending trouble. Some farmers swore that the behavior of animals was more reliable than barometers, though historians still debate the accuracy of such claims. You watch a cow stamp its hoof anxiously and can't help but consider the possibility, perhaps instinct trumps science when the snow begins to fall. You notice the subtle chaos in the streets. Children, momentarily thrilled by the first flakes, abandon their plans as snow gathers on hats and mittens, sticking like tiny, cold Velcro. Sleds left leaning against fences begin to sink into soft drifts. You step carefully, mindful of the uneven surface, and note the contrast between the serene whiteness and the growing urgency in everyone's movements. Fringe reports claim that a few sleds were lost entirely to drifting banks, rolling down invisible hills, though whether that's exaggerated or accurate, it's clear the blizzard is asserting itself quietly but insistently. By midday, the snowfall has grown insistent, a steady, almost meditative rhythm that covers every surface. You can feel it on your eyelashes, in your hair, on your tongue when you inadvertently taste the flakes. The world shrinks, flattened by white, muted and hypnotic, yet tense with anticipation. Every subtle gust feels amplified, every faint whisper of wind seems to hint at the storm's next move. And you realize, this is when the blizzard truly begins to hold the town in its gaze, teasing, warning, and demanding attention. The first flakes were a promise, now the snow is becoming an unmistakable herald of what's to come. By late afternoon, the mild thrill of the first flakes has transformed into a rising pulse of tension. You notice the streets darkening under heavy, gray skies, the way shadows cling to the edges of buildings like reluctant spectators. Telephone poles groan under icy sheaths, wires sagging ominously, and you shiver imagining a sudden snap, cutting off communications entirely. People move quickly, their footsteps crunching in time with the wind, and you can almost hear the collective heartbeat of the town, faster, anxious, alert. Historians debate whether the early panic in 1950 was genuine terror or largely a performative preparation, but standing there, you feel that tension in your bones. You catch whispers of odd occurrences. Fringe reports claim a few sleds vanished mysteriously down drifting roads, as if swallowed whole by the snow. Some argue these were exaggerations, products of children's overactive imaginations, while others swear eyewitnesses were telling the truth. You glance down the street, imagining the lost sleds bobbing through invisible valleys, and feel that creeping sense of helplessness that only a gathering storm can instill. The ordinary rhythm of life, mail deliveries, school dismissal, errands, is breaking down, replaced by improvisation and vigilance. Inside homes, families move with a mixture of urgency and ritual. You watch a mother pace with a tin of soup, trying to gauge whether it will last, while children peek out windows with wide eyes, their cheeks flushed from the cold air that sneaks in through tiny cracks. Quirky preparations abound. One father builds an improvised snow barrier along the side porch, while the neighbor's cat is perched on the radiator, flicking its tail in disdain at human fussing. Historians still argue whether these small, last-minute measures actually mitigated storm damage or were simply comforting distractions. You notice that social networks form organically during this rising panic. Neighbors call across yards, lending tools or sharing advice on shoveling techniques. Someone insists on checking every gutter, muttering about ice dams and leaks, while a teenager giggles as they test how far snow can drift into a pile without being noticed by adults. It's a strange blend of seriousness and whimsy, practical strategy interlaced with playful improvisation. The first signs of panic are subtle yet palpable, a collective awareness that the world is shifting, and adaptation is now non-negotiable. Animals, too, seem unsettled. Dogs bark at shadows that aren't there, horses shuffle uneasily in barns, and livestock huddle against walls. Some chickens refuse to move, standing frozen in tiny clumps, and you imagine the anxiety in their tiny feathered brains. Fringe reports say that people sometimes used animal behavior as a guide, trusting instinct over barometer. Whether that method truly predicted snowfall or just added to the theater of preparedness, you can't help but watch, thinking about how survival instincts transcend species. Outside, drifts begin forming in earnest. You step carefully around curbs, noticing how the wind sculpts the snow into smooth waves along fences, curling around mailbox posts like white smoke. Trees bend under the accumulation, and you can almost hear the soft creaks warning of impending collapse. Telephone wires hum with frost, and street signs are half swallowed by the snow. It's chaotic yet oddly hypnotic, a dance between human effort and nature's overwhelming force. Historians still debate whether towns were adequately warned about these early intensities, or if the storm's rapid escalation simply outpaced every precaution. You feel it most of all in your chest, that tight, uneasy anticipation, as if the world is holding its breath. The blizzard isn't fully unleashed yet, but its fingers are everywhere, in the bent branches, the sagging wires, the hurried movements of neighbors. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you recall the playful warnings of folklore: when the wind bites at windows and cows huddle, the snow will not just visit, it will insist on staying. You trudge onward, sensing that the storm is no longer polite. Its quiet menace has grown into a force that is both mesmerizing and mildly terrifying, and you can't help but feel that the real ordeal is about to begin. The wind's voice grows louder, hammering against rooftops with a rhythm that feels almost impatient, as if nature itself is drumming a warning you cannot ignore. You duck into an alley for momentary relief, pressing your back against a brick wall that shivers under the gusts. Mailboxes topple like dominoes, and every loose object in sight becomes a potential missile, bouncing and spinning in the chaos. Inside, the clatter of shutters and creaking of siding is almost musical, if music could be terrifying. Historians still argue whether the Midwest had ever seen such rapid escalation in wind intensity, but standing here, you can feel the air slicing past your coat with genuine insistence. Some families resort to inventive, and occasionally absurd, methods to cope. You notice a household that literally tied themselves to trees to avoid being swept into a drift, ropes cinched tight around belts and branches, the family holding hands for extra stability. It's a sight so bizarre it would be funny if it weren't entirely plausible. Fringe accounts suggest these tree-bound tactics were more common than records indicate, though whether they actually helped or merely kept people entertained is hotly debated. You imagine trying to explain this to someone in a calmer season. Yes, we secured ourselves to a maple tree to survive Thanksgiving. Inside, the frantic energy continues. Children are pressed against frosted windows, noses flattened in curiosity, while parents double-check coal stoves, rationed canned goods, and the growing snow piles outside. You notice the rhythmic way some families tap on windows or shake doors to check if the walls shiver under the wind's force, a silent communication that says, it's getting serious. Some quirky innovations emerge, kettles of water balanced on chairs to steam and humidify rooms, tin cans filled with embers to radiate small pockets of warmth. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these improvised strategies versus more conventional methods. Animals, predictably, are in various states of panic or stoic endurance. Dogs brace against walls, cats hiss from the rafters, and horses paw the ground, impatiently waiting for shelter or food. Some chickens cluster in corners, feathers fluffed to double their apparent size, looking like miniature snowballs on legs. Locals treat their behaviors as omens, sometimes changing plans based on a restless cow or a frantic dog. Whether these reactions reliably predicted snow accumulation is uncertain, but they certainly influenced human decisions in a storm that respected neither time nor convenience. Outside, the streets are unrecognizable. You trudge past fences where snow curls into bizarre, sculptural forms, creating mini tunnels and vaults that hide hedges and trash cans. The blizzard sculpts the familiar into something both whimsical and hostile. You see a child's sled half buried at the curb, a frozen monument to halted play, and laugh despite yourself. The absurdity is unavoidable. You are witnessing a world being remade by wind and ice, and yet, people continue their chores, dragging firewood through drifts taller than their knees. The storm tightens its grip as night approaches. You hear distant laughter mingled with frustration, the human soundtrack of endurance and improvisation. Small towns have begun improvising communal shelters, basements and barns fill with neighbors seeking warmth, sharing stories, and inventing games to distract from the cold. Quirky phenomena abound. Some residents toss snowballs at lamp posts to see if they will bounce, while others fashion impromptu snow tunnels for pets, a mix of survival instinct and whimsical boredom. Historians still argue whether these social adaptations were primarily practical or more about maintaining morale during long, freezing nights. By the time you pause for a breath, leaning against a fence caked in wind-blown frost, it's clear the blizzard is no longer content to test, it demands attention. It stretches its fingers over rooftops, alleys, and yards, forcing humans, animals, and all things in its path to respond. You can feel the tension in your shoulders, the tightness in your chest, as the storm asserts its authority. The town is alive in a new rhythm, a syncopated dance of survival and ingenuity, and you realize that this grip, relentless and untamed, will define the next chapter of the Thanksgiving blizzard of 1950. You step outside, the world transformed. The snow isn't just falling anymore, it's interacting with everything it touches. Livestock huddle in barns, tails tucked, eyes blinking against icy drafts. You feel a twinge of empathy as cows press their bodies against one another for warmth, their breath fogging the air in rhythmic puffs. Pets, too, are adjusting, cats perched on radiators, dogs pressed against furniture, trembling in the intermittent drafts that slip past poorly sealed doors. Some chickens reportedly froze mid-step in their coops, a fringe anecdote that persists in local lore. Historians still debate how much these animal behaviors actually influenced human preparation strategies, though it's clear that they were watched closely. In backyards, you notice subtle traces of the storm's advancing energy. Bird feeders sag under the weight of ice, swings hang motionless, and garden tools vanish beneath small drifts. You almost step on a rabbit's tracks, delicate and fleeting, and imagine the way all living things are navigating the same frozen maze. Human ingenuity manifests here in microcosms, farmers bracing gates with extra posts, neighbors improvising windbreaks with hay bales, and children experimenting with snow tunnels that sometimes collapse almost immediately. Some of these attempts are both practical and playful, blurring the line between survival and amusement. Inside homes, the sense of urgency heightens. Families huddle closer to coal stoves, fireplaces, and any source of warmth. You hear the occasional tinkle of a spoon against a can, marking a rationed meal, or the soft exclamation of a child discovering a marshmallow forgotten in a drawer. Fringe accounts note that some townsfolk began using the warmth of old car engines, parked in garages, to supplement heating, improvised solutions born from necessity and curiosity. Historians still argue whether these strategies were widely effective or mostly symbolic, but they reflect human adaptability in a world suddenly constrained by ice. The wind gnashes and rumbles outside, shaking loose debris, and you notice how it reshapes the landscape in real time. Snow slides off rooftops in sudden avalanches, forming new drifts that swallow fences and tools. You imagine how animals might perceive this constant reshaping, adapting instinctively, while humans attempt to anticipate, manipulate, and endure. Some families even tied themselves to stationary objects in extreme cases, recalling the tree-bound antics from earlier, though this was rare. Quirky behavior emerges as a coping mechanism. Townspeople mark paths with lanterns, tie scraps of cloth to fence posts, and keep tabs on neighbors via shouted updates, creating a social choreography amid chaos. By late afternoon, streets are largely impassable. You notice a horse-drawn wagon abandoned mid-drift, its passenger peering anxiously at the swirling white horizon. Children, now briefly lulled indoors, press faces to windows, marveling at the way familiar houses disappear under layers of snow. The rhythm of the town has shifted, ordinary life has been suspended, replaced by small acts of vigilance, tending animals, stoking stoves, checking on neighbors. Historians still debate whether these adaptive behaviors were spontaneous or influenced by prior storms, though their effectiveness is undeniable. In barns, you imagine the smell of hay mixed with animals' breath, warmth concentrated in tight spaces where survival instincts blend with routine care. Farmers speak softly to their livestock, offering reassurance through gentle touch and steady hands. You realize that empathy, human and animal alike, becomes a survival skill here, a subtle, quiet bond that might make the difference between comfort and catastrophe. Fringe reports even suggest some families sang to their animals to maintain calm, a charming, if unverified, practice. Walking past a partially frozen creek, you notice ice forming strange patterns on the surface, capturing the low light and fleeting glitter. It reminds you that even amid chaos, beauty persists. Yet the blizzard is relentless, and the animal struggle mirrors human adaptation, careful, measured, improvisational. You trudge forward, feeling both awe and anxiety, recognizing that this chapter of the storm, the animal's response, is both emblematic and instructive, a subtle prelude to the heightening challenges that await the town. You step onto streets now almost alien under the growing weight of snow. Vehicles, cars, trucks, even the occasional trolley, sit abandoned, half buried in drifts that rise like frozen waves. The cold bites deeper, turning breath into clouds that vanish almost immediately, and you trudge past an overturned cart, imagining the chaos that must have unfolded when it tipped over. Fringe rumors circulate of a school bus full of turkeys that allegedly rolled downhill like a snowball, leaving residents both horrified and oddly amused. Historians still question the veracity of such tales, but standing here, you can see how easy it is for stories to mutate under the influence of a relentless storm. The streets are eerily quiet. Only the wind speaks, scraping against metal, rattling shutters, and whistling through the skeletal branches of trees. You notice tire tracks abruptly ending, footprints swallowed mid-step, and the odd pattern of drifted snow forming small tunnels and caves along fences. It's a frozen landscape, both playful and threatening, where missteps could mean a lost mitten, or worse, a disoriented path home. People move cautiously, dragging sleds, boots crunching rhythmically, voices muted by the density of the air and the insistence of the storm. Inside, families adapt with creativity and humor. One quirky tactic emerges in small towns: snowball drills. Children and teenagers practice tossing snow at imagined targets, honing accuracy while keeping warm and entertained. Parents shake their heads but can't suppress small smiles, recognizing the necessity of morale in a frozen siege. Historians debate whether such games were widespread or isolated, but you note that amusement, even tiny, becomes as critical as firewood or canned beans in maintaining resilience. Transportation collapse extends beyond mere inconvenience. You spot a train halted on the outskirts of town, tracks invisible under several inches of snow. Delivery trucks remain parked indefinitely, their engines off, half concealed by snow banks. And yet, life finds improvisational pathways. Neighbors share rides with sleds, hitching horses to wagons, or simply walking with measured determination. Fringe reports claim some school buses were pressed into hauling supplies instead of children, a creative repurposing of infrastructure that feels both practical and slightly absurd. Historians still debate whether these stopgap measures significantly reduced hardship or were merely anecdotal anecdotes blown into legend. Animals continue to complicate the scene. Cats, dogs, and livestock maneuver through the accumulating snow, their patterns influencing human movement. You notice a horse refusing to budge, apparently frozen in indecision, while chickens disappear entirely beneath drifts. Some people swear that observing the livestock helped them anticipate snow accumulation and plan routes, though evidence is mostly anecdotal. Still, the rhythm of life for both humans and animals is increasingly dictated by ice and wind, a quiet negotiation of priorities and instinct. Inside, families develop layered strategies for sustenance and warmth. Canned food becomes more than a convenience, it's a measured, precious resource. Water must be melted from snow, firewood rationed carefully, and stoves kept stoked for maximum efficiency. Quirky improvisations abound, kettles set on inverted pans to create makeshift humidifiers, scrap wood fashioned into extra insulation for windows, and old car engines humming in garages to supplement heat. You imagine the cacophony of these adaptations, a background symphony of resilience, clanging, hissing, and whispered instructions. By evening, the storm has become the arbiter of every action. Streets, once familiar, are labyrinths of white, vehicles are monuments to halted mobility, animals and humans alike navigate cautiously, improvising continuously. You feel the pressure of the blizzard, its presence both beautiful and threatening, shaping the town's rhythm with invisible hands. And as night falls, the collapse of transportation solidifies the communal sense of isolation, forcing neighbors to depend on ingenuity, cooperation, and a touch of humor to endure the relentless cold. You trudge through alleyways where shadows of snowbanks create miniature canyons, imagining how neighbors are gathering close inside, huddled in basements and living rooms. There's a quiet hum of collaboration. Someone shovels a path to a shared well, another checks on a neighbor's stove, and children whisper over games invented to distract from frostbitten fingers. Community bonds are forming not out of ceremony, but necessity, shared survival weaving invisible threads between households. Quirky anecdotes emerge, like towns staging snow fashion shows to boost morale, neighbors strapping scarves and hats on mannequins, judging creativity amid the drifts. Historians debate whether such events were widespread or merely isolated bursts of human creativity, but you notice the effect. Even in the cold, people find ways to connect. Inside the homes, warmth and laughter coexist with the ongoing stress of the storm. You notice the flicker of candlelight and the soft hiss of stoves, and imagine families trading stories, practical tips, and jokes over steaming mugs of coffee. One father demonstrates snowball throwing techniques to impatient children, a mother reminds everyone to ration marshmallows for morale purposes. The scene is chaotic yet intimate, a microcosm of human adaptation and resilience. Fringe reports even suggest towns held improvised dances in garages and basements, celebrating survival while the blizzard raged outside. Animals are part of the social calculus. Chickens and dogs become unexpected participants in communal life, as people monitor their behavior for signs of trouble. A restless dog triggers a run for firewood, a nervous hen prompts sheltering adjustments, and livestock instincts subtly guide human decisions. Historians still debate how predictive animal behavior was in preparing for storm intensity, but the anecdotal evidence shows people were paying close attention. Outdoors, you notice a transformed landscape. Sidewalks are narrow tunnels between towering drifts, fences are barely visible under blankets of snow, and rooftops sag under their white burden. Children venture out cautiously for sled rides, carefully supervised to prevent mishaps. You smile at the creativity, snow tunnels constructed between houses, impromptu forts built for warmth, paths marked with lanterns to guide the way. Every action is part survival, part play, a blend that underscores the human capacity to find light in darkness. Communication takes on inventive forms. With telephone lines intermittently down, neighbors shout across yards, relay messages through windows, or leave notes wedged indoors. Radios crackle intermittently, offering partial news and reassurance. One quirky tidbit: a local DJ reportedly read a storm forecast backward on air as a joke, a fleeting moment of levity during growing tension. Historians still argue whether media coverage helped more than it confused, but for townsfolk, any bit of connection is precious. The rhythm of the town evolves. Every shoveling effort, every step across slippery ground, and every warm laugh inside builds a collective memory. You notice that human ingenuity and social cohesion are as important as coal and canned goods. Families exchange tasks, share warmth, and invent small routines to pass the time. The storm has made them neighbors in a profound sense, united by circumstance and the mutual understanding that survival depends on connection as much as preparation. You pause to watch a young boy and his dog negotiating a snowbank, careful, persistent, and playful. It strikes you that these moments, small, seemingly trivial, are the emotional glue holding the community together. Even amid chaos, laughter, and inventive games, the bonds created now may outlast the storm itself. And in this frozen, transformed town, you realize that human creativity, empathy, and solidarity are just as formidable as any blizzard. The evening news struggles to keep pace. Radios crackle and pop, delivering fragments of information that make you lean in closer, straining to catch the latest updates. You realize that communication is as much about imagination as it is about fact, the missing words and half-sentences filling in with guesses and expectation. Newspapers, too, are behind the curve, their presses slowed or halted by iced roads and disrupted deliveries. The blizzard has made the town simultaneously insular and dependent on whatever snippets of knowledge manage to arrive. Historians still debate whether the media in 1950 effectively informed the public, or if delays and interruptions merely heightened anxiety. Inside, families react to this partial knowledge in curious ways. Some people whisper updates to each other, transforming rumor into practical guidance. The North Road is impassable. The river bridge may collapse. Bring extra blankets if you're venturing outside. You notice children listening intently, their imagination filling in gaps with stories of snow monsters or heroic rescues, while adults argue over which measures are essential. Fringe accounts even suggest that one local DJ read the storm forecast backward on air as a joke, playful mischief in the midst of tension, and oddly reassuring. Outside, the wind's whispers have escalated into gusts that rattle signs and lift loose objects. Snow forms tunnels around doors and climbs up fences like frozen waves. You imagine navigating these alleys, ducking under sheets of ice-laden branches, and understand how quickly normal movement becomes a tactical exercise. People improvise constantly, shoveling paths, reinforcing railings, and marking trails with lanterns or strips of cloth. Oddly, some even create makeshift obstacle courses for pets, both practical and whimsical, blending survival and play in ways that feel distinctly human. Meanwhile, power struggles begin in earnest. Coal stoves sputter and demand constant attention, while electricity falters under the ice-laden grid. You notice the meticulous rotation of firewood, the rationing of candles, and the faint, clever ingenuity of families using old car engines and garages to generate heat. Historians still argue whether utility companies in 1950 were truly prepared for such sudden freezes, but it's evident that improvisation was essential for warmth. Quirky tidbits include one household filling metal cans with embers, creating portable heat sources that doubled as impromptu nightlights. Animals, predictably, are adapting in real time. Dogs huddle closer to radiators, cats scowl from elevated perches, and livestock shift uneasily in barns, sensing the intensity of the storm. You notice how small animal behaviors ripple through human decision-making. A restless horse may trigger a preemptive check on feed, a skittish dog may inspire extra vigilance for wandering snow drifts. Historians debate how predictive these instincts were, yet their influence on day-to-day survival cannot be dismissed. The streets have become a frozen labyrinth. You step cautiously, noting where drifts conceal hazards or create unexpected slopes. Occasional laughter echoes from basements and attics, neighbors finding ways to play, to distract, to endure. Snowballs fly in tentative, careful arcs, children experiment with sleds in sheltered nooks. Even in the midst of near isolation, the human impulse for connection, for creativity, persists. Fringe anecdotes suggest that some towns even held competitions for the best snow fort, blending survival with entertainment. As darkness settles, you feel the heightened intimacy of this frozen night. Partial news, intermittent warmth, animal guidance, and neighborly collaboration form a patchwork safety net. The storm is both external and internal. It presses against buildings, distorts streets, and infiltrates thoughts. You realize that surviving the Thanksgiving blizzard isn't only about coal or canned goods, it's about ingenuity, empathy, and adaptability. And tonight, the rhythm of survival is set by a blend of human determination and nature's relentless insistence. The night deepens, and with it, the cold intensifies. Coal furnaces sputter and hiss, electric lights flicker, and you huddle under thick blankets, feeling the draft that somehow snakes around even the sturdiest doors. Outside, the wind gnashes at rooftops, rattles siding, and whispers like a restless specter, reminding you that warmth is never guaranteed. Families rotate shifts at stoves, checking embers, feeding fires, and rationing coal with the precision of seasoned tacticians. Historians still argue whether the utility companies of 1950 could have realistically anticipated this sudden freeze, or if households were left to invent survival methods out of necessity. Inside, improvisation dominates. You notice a mother melting snow to replenish a water supply for cooking, a father keeping a small fire in a metal can to heat a corner of the living room, and children tucked under quilts, practicing patience. Fringe accounts describe families running car engines in garages to keep small rooms warm, their ingenuity bordering on absurdity but undeniably effective. You can almost hear the faint roar of exhaust blending with the crackle of coal, a peculiar soundtrack to the night's endurance. The storm has forced a recalibration of priorities. Every task is now measured against survival, checking on neighbors, ensuring animals are fed, and maintaining lines of communication. Animals, as always, play a subtle but significant role. A restless dog prompts extra firewood, a skittish cow inspires a rearrangement of hay bales. Chickens continue their strange, motionless vigil in coops, a quirky reminder that life adapts in unexpected ways. Historians still debate how much attention to animal behavior actually helped humans survive, but anecdotal evidence suggests it mattered more than one might assume. Outside, the snow continues its unrelenting accumulation. Drifts rise along fences, stairways vanish under white waves, and rooftops groan under the growing weight. You imagine the treacherous sidewalks, the frozen creeks, and the hidden hazards lurking beneath the seemingly pristine surface. Yet within the chaos, small victories emerge, a cleared path to a neighbor's door, a makeshift windbreak, a lantern flickering steadily against the storm's encroachment. These acts, however minor, build morale and sustain life. Children and teens discover ways to blend play with endurance. A snowball game in the alley doubles as reconnaissance for safe pathways, sledding becomes a controlled exercise in balance, and spontaneous snow races test both courage and creativity. Even in the tension, you notice laughter sneaking through, brief bursts that warm the spirit more effectively than any fire. Fringe stories suggest that some towns used these impromptu games as a way to distract from the fear, creating small, controlled joys amid chaos. The night's darkness amplifies the storm's effects. Every howl of wind feels like a reminder of nature's dominance, every crack of ice is a subtle threat. Yet you also notice resilience, neighbors shouting through walls to ensure everyone is safe, improvised heaters providing comfort, and the quiet hum of routines adapted to new conditions. The blizzard has become a force that shapes not just the landscape but the very rhythm of daily life, demanding attention, creativity, and cooperation. By the late hours, the storm has fully immersed the town. You feel the tension in your chest, the icy pull at your extremities, and the constant negotiation between warmth, safety, and vigilance. Survival is now a combination of strategy, improvisation, and empathy. You understand that enduring the Thanksgiving blizzard of 1950 isn't just about weathering cold, it's about maintaining connection, routine, and humor, even as the world outside becomes a swirling, white unknown. You awake, or perhaps never fully slept, to the blizzard's deep, persistent howl. The night has carved quiet tunnels in the town, snowdrifts piled high against doors and windows, leaving only the occasional sliver of light to mark familiar shapes. Footsteps from earlier have disappeared under fresh accumulation, making even short journeys feel like expeditions into unknown territory. You pull your coat tighter, feeling the bite of wind through every gap, and notice the way the trees shiver under heavy frost, their skeletal branches trembling in rhythm with the gusts. Historians still debate whether the snow accumulation in this period was truly exceptional or amplified by anecdotal memory, but the scene before you feels absolute, undeniable. Inside, the routines of endurance continue with subtle ritual. You watch families carefully measure water and food, rotate firewood like currency, and invent small diversions for children trapped indoors. One inventive household converts a small table into a snow measuring station, noting drift heights and estimating the storm's future reach. Fringe accounts describe families keeping diaries of the storm's progress, not unlike amateur scientists cataloging events, blending necessity with curiosity. You notice how the act of observation itself, watching snowflakes, tracking wind shifts, noting animal behavior, becomes a tool for comfort, a way to assert control in a world suddenly dominated by chaos. Animals play their continuing roles in the household drama. Chickens, now fully hidden beneath snow or huddled in corners, offer cues that humans interpret with varying degrees of seriousness. Dogs, restless and alert, patrol the perimeter, noses twitching at shifting snow. Horses shuffle in stalls, their hooves crunching rhythmically, while cats maintain a distant, skeptical oversight from warm ledges. Humans treat these behaviors as both practical warnings and subtle reminders of shared endurance. Historians still debate how predictive these animal responses truly were, but their importance in human decision-making is clear. Outside, the blizzard sculpts the world into abstract forms. Fences vanish beneath the weight of snow, rooftops bulge, streets collapse under hidden hazards, and the once familiar landscape is alien. You navigate with care, imagining how residents check for dangerous drifts, reinforce windows, and maintain narrow paths to essentials. Quirky improvisations persist, snow tunnels to connect houses, makeshift sled routes for supplies, and lanterns marking critical paths. The storm's power is absolute, yet human creativity adapts in surprising ways, weaving practicality with whimsy. Communal efforts continue quietly. Families call to neighbors, check livestock, and share resources. One neighbor passes coal to another through a small window opening, exchanging a few words over the roar of wind. You notice these small acts, practical, yet profoundly human, becoming the backbone of survival. Fringe reports even mention impromptu music sessions, with families singing softly to maintain morale, their voices mingling with the storm outside. Historians still argue whether these efforts materially affected survival or merely maintained spirits, but standing here, you sense the blend of necessity and resilience. By mid-morning, the blizzard has reached a point of relentless insistence. Snow piles against doors like barricades, sidewalks vanish entirely, and the horizon is a flat, white void. Yet in basements, living rooms, and barns, life persists. Children experiment with mini sledding courses, adults stagger supplies to neighbors, and pets continue to prompt critical human action. You recognize that the storm is now a teacher, a relentless instructor shaping routines, habits, and improvisations. Every movement, every decision, becomes a negotiation with ice and wind. Evening approaches again, and you feel the cumulative fatigue of human effort, the mental strain of constant vigilance, and the deep satisfaction in small victories, a cleared doorway, a stocked stove, a well-fed animal. The town exists now in a delicate balance between exhaustion and endurance, chaos and creativity. The blizzard isn't just weather, it's a force that defines every action, thought, and relationship, revealing both the fragility and resilience of life in its wake. The blizzard enters its second full day, and the town has settled into a strange, hypnotic rhythm. You step outside, boots crunching over snow that has hardened in layers, and notice how familiar streets are now alien landscapes, tunnels and drifts masking once clear pathways. Telephone poles sag under icy coats, fences bow under the pressure, and rooftops bulge with accumulations so heavy they seem to threaten collapse. The wind whistles relentlessly, carving patterns into the snow that are almost hypnotic, like frozen waves frozen mid-crash. Historians still debate whether storms of this magnitude were truly unprecedented or if the intensity of memory has exaggerated events, but standing here, it feels monumental. Inside, the townsfolk have become inventors, improvisers, and strategists. You notice families rationing fuel, melting snow for water, and maintaining lantern-lit corridors so children can traverse home safely. Some quirky adaptations emerge: homemade snowshoes, improvised sled paths, and even cat-sized snow tunnels to keep pets from venturing into dangerous drifts. Fringe reports mention families playing card games on snow-covered porches, betting marshmallows for entertainment, a mixture of survival, creativity, and morale building. You smile at the combination of seriousness and playfulness. It's the hallmark of enduring a storm that refuses to yield. Animals continue to shape human behavior. Dogs remain alert, cats perch vigilantly, and livestock adjust positions within barns to avoid cold drafts. You notice how these movements influence household routines. A restless dog triggers extra patrols of pathways, a shifting cow prompts adjustments in hay placement. Historians still argue whether animal behavior was genuinely predictive of snow severity or simply a coincidental cue, but its impact on human activity is undeniable. The town's infrastructure groans under the blizzard's persistence. Roads are impassable, vehicles buried, and street signs vanish under mounds of snow. You imagine the logistics, neighbors sharing sleds, clearing narrow tunnels, and improvising supply lines. There's humor even amid hardship. One anecdote tells of a horse being mistaken for a snowdrift by a hurried passerby, creating laughter despite exhaustion. These small human moments interlace with the overarching struggle, a testament to resilience and adaptability. Inside homes, life is intimate and ritualized. Families rotate firewood, share heated spaces, and engage in quiet activities to maintain morale. Children invent snowball target games in hallways, adults maintain stoves with precise care, and all practice patience, a skill as essential as rationing food or checking animals. Fringe accounts report that some communities established snow couriers, young teens ferrying notes or supplies across treacherous drifts, blending responsibility, adventure, and necessity. Historians still debate how widespread such practices were, but they illustrate the social adaptations that emerge under prolonged isolation. By mid-afternoon, the blizzard's force is unmistakable. Snow sculpts landscapes into surreal, monochromatic scenes, the wind's bite penetrates even the thickest layers of clothing, and humans navigate through both literal and figurative obstacles. You feel the tension in every movement. A misstep could result in a tumble into an unseen drift, a misplaced lantern could extinguish hope, a neglected animal could suffer. Yet the townsfolk persist, blending creativity, vigilance, and humor in a choreography dictated by ice and wind. As darkness falls again, the town has transformed. The blizzard's persistence has enforced cooperation, improvisation, and subtle humor. You notice laughter breaking through the monotony, moments of quiet triumph over small victories, clearing a doorway, reaching a neighbor, feeding livestock. The storm is both adversary and teacher, revealing the depth of human ingenuity while testing patience, endurance, and empathy. You realize that survival now hinges not only on heat and food but on connection, adaptability, and the ability to find levity amid relentless challenge. The storm reaches its crescendo. You trudge through streets that have become rivers of snow, drifts towering over cars, fences, and lamp posts. Visibility is near zero, the horizon disappears into a blur of white. Every step is deliberate, measured, a negotiation with the terrain itself. Snow whistles through narrow alleys, rattling shutters, and scouring rooftops. You imagine the sound carrying for miles, a continuous, haunting symphony of winter. Historians still argue whether the blizzard's intensity was a freak anomaly or a convergence of multiple meteorological factors, but there's no doubt that the town is under siege in the purest sense. Inside, families have perfected survival routines. Coal and firewood are rationed with meticulous care, water is melted in kettles, sparing every drop, lanterns flicker in strategic corners. Children invent quiet games to pass time, while adults monitor stoves, pathways, and livestock. Fringe accounts tell of snow tunnels dug between homes to allow safe passage without exposure, a mix of practicality, whimsy, and sheer stubbornness. You imagine the soft echo of shovels against drifted snow, a rhythm that mirrors the pulse of the storm itself. Animals have become both companions and guides. Dogs stand guard near doors, cats monitor warmth sources, and livestock shift subtly in barns, responding to unseen drafts. You notice that each movement prompts human reactions. A paw scratching on a window leads to additional insulation, a horse's restless shuffle results in extra hay. Historians still debate how much of this was instinctual versus anecdotal guidance, but the interplay is undeniable. Animals and humans now operate in a silent, cooperative feedback loop, each informing the other's next move. Outside, the blizzard sculpts the environment into strange, surreal shapes. Drifts tower over fences like frozen waves, rooftops sag under the weight of snow, and streets are barely visible beneath a uniform white blanket. Children daring enough to venture outside navigate tunnels and corridors built by their own shoveling efforts. You see sleds abandoned mid-drift, hats and mittens left behind, and the odd snowball test firing across narrow alleyways. Even in chaos, the human need for play, challenge, and creativity emerges, a survival mechanism as vital as firewood or coal. Communal efforts reach their peak. Neighbors exchange food, share warmth, and maintain communication by shouting or leaving notes in cleared paths. Laughter persists in small bursts, a joke whispered over a shared cup of hot chocolate, a playful argument about the proper way to build a snow fort. Fringe stories claim that some townsfolk staged mini races with snow sleds to deliver messages, blending necessity with ingenuity. Historians still argue whether these tales were widespread or isolated anecdotes, but they capture the resilient, improvisational spirit of a town under relentless pressure. As night falls, the storm's weight is unmistakable. Buildings groan, streets vanish beneath snow waves, and the wind's roar dominates all other sound. Yet inside, life persists, meals rationed, fires maintained, animals cared for, and morale gently preserved. You feel the tension, the fatigue, but also the remarkable adaptability of humans confronting nature at its most uncompromising. Every small triumph, a cleared doorway, a successful sled run, a saved animal, becomes a victory against the relentless white. The blizzard has shaped behavior, community, and imagination, leaving the town both exhausted and strangely alive in ways only extreme conditions can provoke. The storm finally begins its slow retreat, though the landscape it leaves behind is transformed beyond recognition. You step outside cautiously, boots sinking into soft, compacted drifts that cover cars, fences, and streets alike. The wind has eased slightly, replaced by an eerie, muffled quiet, the kind that makes every creak and groan of frozen timber feel amplified. Telephone poles lean stubbornly, some broken, wires drooping dangerously low, and rooftops sag under the stubborn weight of snow. Historians still debate whether the blizzard's sheer speed and accumulation were truly unprecedented or amplified in memory, but for you, the scale of devastation feels indisputable. The town emerges in a strange, tentative rhythm. People venture out, shovels in hand, carefully testing pathways, clearing entrances, and helping neighbors navigate the treacherous terrain. You notice acts of ingenuity and resilience everywhere. Snow tunnels remain in use for safe passage, lanterns mark critical routes, and animals cautiously explore areas previously buried. Fringe anecdotes persist about children sliding down hills of drifted snow to deliver messages, dogs guiding paths, and neighbors improvising sled lines for supplies. Whether fully accurate or embellished, these stories convey the creativity and determination that define human response in extreme conditions. Inside, homes recover slowly. Coal stoves burn steadily, water is rationed but restored, and animals are fed and soothed after their ordeal. Families gather around warm spots, sharing quiet conversation, laughter, and small comforts that feel monumental after days of tension. Children recount their adventures in snow tunnels and improvised sled races, eyes bright with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. Historians still debate the effectiveness of such small-scale morale strategies, but they clearly reinforce resilience and social cohesion in the aftermath. The snow continues to sculpt the town in surreal ways. Streets remain obscured, cars are half-buried monuments to the storm's power, and trees sag under layers of ice and frost. You step carefully, noting the way every movement is cautious, deliberate, a negotiation with unseen hazards. Communities improvise, clearing paths, sharing tools, and marking landmarks for safety. Quirky improvisations endure, children fashion snow forts as tiny landmarks, pets navigate newly formed tunnels, and adults test makeshift bridges across drifted sidewalks. Animals emerge from their shelters tentatively, testing conditions as humans do. Horses, dogs, and cats cautiously explore familiar yards now transformed into alien landscapes, while chickens peck gingerly at exposed ground. Their behavior continues to influence human action, a subtle feedback loop of instinct and observation. Fringe accounts suggest some families even relied on livestock to gauge which areas were safely navigable, blending survival with gentle humor. As evening falls, the blizzard's memory lingers in every surface and every sound. The town, exhausted but intact, demonstrates the combined force of human ingenuity, empathy, and endurance. You notice how neighbors check in on one another, share remaining warmth, and celebrate small victories over the storm. Historians still argue whether these communities fully understood the meteorological rarity of the event, but their lived experience shows the effectiveness of adaptation, improvisation, and solidarity. The blizzard has taught lessons in patience, ingenuity, and community. Streets, rooftops, and yards bear the mark of its relentless force, yet human creativity, humor, and empathy have prevailed. As you trudge through this transformed landscape, you recognize the quiet triumph of a town that survived one of the most unexpected Thanksgiving storms in history, a blend of endurance, wit, and communal care that ensured life persisted. The storm fades in memory, leaving only the lingering scent of coal, the gentle crunch of residual snow underfoot, and the knowledge that humans can adapt, endure, and even find joy amid adversity.